Welcome in to the New Orleans Saints podcast, hosted by Erin Summers and John DeShazier. You'll hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and writers who cover the team on a daily basis. The New Orleans Saints podcast starts right now. Here's your hosts, Erin Summers and John DeShazier.
You standing there and listen to our leaders speak, and you hear DeMario saying stuff, you hear myself and other guys saying stuff like, we're not going to let this thing, become a snowball. You can't. And so, sometimes the end result is never, no one wants to lose, the end result is not what we want, but our process and the way we work can't change. But you do have to look at it and say, what is it? Each man has to look and say, well, what is it that I'm doing that maybe I could do something better? And if everyone does that, it'll be hopefully the same kind of turnaround we had, last season. But our team and the unity is in a good place, and that's a good sign. We have fallen, 3 times, but there's no quit, there's no pointing fingers, there's none of that. And so, proud of the character of this team. It's a tight group, and we're going to keep fighting. Whoever we play next, whoever we play after that, we're going to show up and we're going to play.
Welcome into the New Orleans Saints podcast. I'm Erin Summers alongside our senior Saints writer, John DeShazier. The Saints took a 26-13 loss at Kansas City last night. It was a rough start, and things did not seem to get much better throughout the game. Right now, the Saints have lost 3 in a row. They are now 2-3 on the season. JD, you were there at the game last night. What was the vibe, the feeling in the locker room after this one?
Well, it was debilitating because, and I don't know if debilitating is the right word, deflating. Mm-hmm. You don't play as well as you want to on a national stage against the 2-time defending Super Bowl champs on the road. And I know there are a lot of obstacles that aren't working in your favor, but you don't put out your best product. Mm-hmm. And nobody wants to be associated with that kind of game. I mean, the Saints lost 26-13. It felt bigger.
Yeah.
And even though they closed it within 10-7 and 16-13 because they missed the PAT, it would have been 16-14, but it just didn't feel like they could get their hands wrapped around the game to the point where it was going to be a real threat to Kansas City. And then it seemed like every time they were able to do something, Kansas City just kind of flipped the switch and say, okay, we need some points. Let's go get some. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't a good feeling, a good mode in the locker room because they didn't play well enough to feel good about much of anything.
This one, it was a little interesting from the start because the Saints won the coin toss and they opted to receive, which at that point I saw a lot of reactions on Twitter. They're like, oh, I kind of like that. Like the Saints want to go out there, set the tone. They want the ball first.
Yeah, and then after the turnover, people are like, why did they do that?
Right.
Well, look, folks, winning or losing the coin toss is no elixir, okay? Saints, they didn't win the coin toss, I think, in the first 2 games because they didn't receive or they deferred. Either one. Getting the ball first is not a magic elixir. Okay, so Derek Carr does throw an interception on that mm-hmm. drive. They reach the 39-yard line of Kansas City. He throws an interception. KC intercepts it, I think, at the 21-22. But still, they got to go 78 yards to get that touchdown. They got to go the length of the field, and the defense couldn't get off the field and couldn't get a stop. So it goes hand in hand. You can say, well, they shouldn't have taken it, or they should have taken it and been aggressive. However it goes, it's a complementary game. One unit can't win without the other generally. And so, the offense, kind of made a bust. Wasn't a kind of bust. Offense made a bust. But the defense needs to pick them up. And look, the Saints have asked a lot of this defense early this season. The last 2 games in particular, where they probably played their best 2 games, I think, of the season, and they didn't win either one of them. The previous games against Philly and against Atlanta, where the defense was phenomenal and didn't win the game. The Saints didn't win the game. So the defense wasn't at its best on Monday night. The offense certainly wasn't at its best. And you mix that in, and then you say, well, you'd love for the special teams to chip in. But, getting a big play off of special teams is rare and it's difficult to do. You just don't block punts every game. You don't return kicks for touchdowns every game. Those things are kind of, flashing. I don't want to say flash in the pans, but I mean, those are, you see Bigfoot more often than that.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to depend on special teams to save the day. So taking the ball first, I had no problem with it. Even turning it over that early, I didn't feel like it was disastrous. But when you turn it over and you give momentum and then they go down and get a touchdown off of it, now suddenly it's like, oh my goodness, there's a hole that you really can't dig out of.
It came down to a couple things. Offensively, the inability to really establish a run game. And then it just seemed like Carr felt sped up and he was making quicker decisions, whether it was because of the offensive line, because there was a lot of different people in different positions, or because of the fact that, he's seeing Kansas City a lot. He knows what they can do. He knows how much they want to blitz and pressure you.
He is sped up. He's working behind a makeshift offensive line. Kansas City's defensive linemen are kind of living in the backfield in his face. They're in front of him pretty regular. And so in those situations, and I get it, people say, well, maintain your points. Well, if you've been hit a few times and you've been rushed and you've been sped up 5 consecutive times, well, on the 6th time, aren't you kind of sort of in the back of your mind expecting it? And so maybe you speed yourself up. That's human nature. I don't understand why people say, well, just hang in there. Human nature is to say, okay, they're coming and I got to get this ball out of my hands and I got to get it to the target immediately. And so, I think you do speed up in those situations. And Kansas City had a lot to do with that. And that's crediting Kansas City. And obviously, the reality is the Saints were working in a difficult position. They haven't had Eric McCoy since the Philly game. They haven't had Cesar Ruiz the last couple of games. So you're out there with Lucas Patrick starting at center. You had Nick Saldiveri making his first NFL start at left guard. You're at Landon Young making his second start at right guard, and you got your 2 tackles. And then Lucas Patrick gets injured.
Right.
And so now you got to shuffle around even more. And you're talking about keeping out of the backfield. And they did a pretty good job of it. But now you're talking about keeping Chris Jones out of the backfield. Well, look, you can have a Hall of Famer at center and guard and tackle and not be able to keep Chris Jones out of the backfield. So now you're talking about doing it with not just the next guy up, but the next man up. And so that makes life a lot more difficult now. I get it. I get it. Folks think you're not supposed to, crack under pressure. You're not supposed to feel pressure, and you're not supposed to react to pressure adversely. But life is different when somebody's hitting you in the mouth as opposed to you sitting on the couch eating potato chips when somebody else is getting hit in the mouth.
They only had 2 sacks. I think only one was on Carr. The other was on Jake Haener later in the game because he came in when Carr did get hurt. We'll get to that. But even though they weren't necessarily getting to Carr, it was because he was getting rid of the ball so quickly or throwing it away, or they were handing it off and getting absolutely nowhere with their run game. Alvin Kamara, he was getting stuffed at the line every single time.
Alvin had a 9-yard run early. I think it was his second carry. And beyond that, he really, because Kansas City did what I assume most Saints opponents will do. And that is you start with Alvin Kamara. That's who you target.
Especially when Taysom Hill's not in the game.
Taysom Hill isn't playing, but even when Taysom is playing, because they're not both going to be on the field at the same time. So you target Alvin Kamara. You say, okay, we're going to take away their number one weapon, the guy who leads the NFL in touchdowns, the guy who's closing in on 1,000 yards from scrimmage. We're going to shut him down. And we're going to see if these other guys can beat you. And you're going to take your chances. Now, the Saints have a couple of really good receivers, Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave. But you can't use those weapons if your quarterback is on his backside. That's the way it goes, folks. That's kind of, the geometry of it. It's hard to throw from your back. It's hard to throw from your back foot. It's hard to throw when people are standing in your face, shoving you in the chest, even though you're able to get the throw off. So those things make life a little bit more difficult, but it begins with Alvin Kamara. And so if I'm the Chiefs, I'm going to see if I can stuff the run and make you beat us throwing the football, because I think we're going to be able to get to the quarterback because of that offensive line, because we feel like we can beat that offensive line. And I feel like we might be able to cover long enough to where we can get to the quarterback.
Alvin Kamara ends up with just 26 yards on the ground and 11 carries. I mean, it's been a long time since we've seen numbers, I don't know if ever, from AK like that.
Yeah, but I mean, it's possible that it will happen again because Tampa Bay, which used to have a ferocious run defense, they're going to say, we got to stop Alvin Kamara. And until you beat a team another way, then I'll continue that recipe until you show me that you can beat me in a way that doesn't involve Alvin Kamara getting, 85, 90 rushing yards on me and 40 yards receiving on 25 touches and maybe a touchdown or 2 touchdowns. If you can show me you can beat me a different way than that, then I might have to adjust. But until you show me that, why would I adjust?
Mm-hmm. They did attempt to give the ball to Jamal Williams a couple times. He only ran for 9 total yards. And then Jake Haener actually was the second leading rusher with 11 yards. And those were just literally him running for his life at the end of the game.
I mean, he's just running for his life. He's just trying to not be obliterated.
46 rushing yards overall by the Saints, lowest of the season. And they had been going over 100 prior. Obviously, Alvin with his total yards, he was only at 66 total, which is, again, underneath what we've been seeing from his production as well. This game was a lot of not getting anything going on the run, and then also Carr not having a lot of time. And so I was kind of perplexed as to why they continued to go for that long ball.
Well, if you're trying to loosen them up and get them back off you, and you probably feel like the best matchup you have is Rashid Shaheed because it looks like he got into some favorable matchups and they just couldn't connect with him. But Rashid Shaheed looked or appeared to be the guy who had the mismatch. And so you go where the read takes you, hopefully. You'd like to see Chris Olave more involved, a lot more involved, because Chris Olave Chris Olave can be a game changer. And you'd like to see more production out of the tight ends. But you've got to go where you feel like you can get the favorable matchup. And Rashid Shaheed is a home run hitter. So, and we saw that with the 43-yard touchdown. He's a home run hitter. And so I can see leaning in that direction. You'd like to see the wealth spread a little bit more. But then on the other hand, Saints only have the ball, I think, for 51 offensive plays.
Yeah.
Only, roll up 220 yards or whatever it was. And so you don't have the ball a lot. You don't have it for a lot of time. They only had the ball for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Basically got doubled up on every major category. Yards, first downs, time of possession, the things that really matter. And it showed on the scoreboard. Got doubled up on the scoreboard. But I can see where you feel like you got the favorable matchup. Now, the percentages drop because these are deep passes, these are deep attempts, and you got to be precise. And so the percentages drop as opposed to when you're doing something underneath. But I'm assuming that's what that was. That's where the read took you. Because, again, if you can neutralize Alvin Kamara and you put the team in a passing situation, and now you might be able to concentrate a little bit more on Chris Olave, who I believe had 3 straight games of 80-plus yards receiving. So now you say, okay, this is the number one guy. Can we live with 22 trying to beat us? And for the most part, they were able to live with it except for the touchdown. It
wasn't only Rashid that they were trying to get on those long balls. It was also Mason Tipton.
Yeah, Mason Tipton.
And we haven't seen a lot of that, but we know he has the speed. We saw that in training camp, and he has been a target here and there up until this past game. I mean, let's see how many targets he had total. 4 total targets, but they were all for big gains. Yeah. Derek Carr said after the game that was a big emphasis for them going into this one, that it was the game plan.
Yeah,
they thought that they were going to have those shots and they were going to take them, and they were going to continue to take them. And they might have, they really were off by just a little bit. Yeah. A couple of those to Tipton and Shaheed really could have been caught had a ball been placed a little bit better. But when you're under such duress as the quarterback, it's really hard to nail those throws.
Yeah, I can think of a couple of them. One to Rashid, who broke open deep, and the pass sailed out of bounds. He would have had to fit it in a couple of receivers, but Rasheed was open. And when Tipton, I don't know if he caught it he was out of bounds regardless, whether he caught it or not. He was out of bounds, so he had an advantage there. But again, those are I know it's the NFL, but those are low percentage plays. The farther you throw it, the lower their percentage, and the better chance that something good might happen for the defense if they're playing proper. But yeah, they obviously felt like they could get something deep against Kansas City, and Kansas City was giving up like 270 plus yards passing a game. So you felt like if you're going to be able to get them, that would be the way to be able to get them. But if you're doing that, it means you got to throw the ball, of course, but you got to be able to protect to do it. And if you're going to, especially if you're going to beat them with the deep passes, that takes a little bit longer to develop. So you got to be able to protect a little bit longer. And that just did not work in the Saints' favor.
Yeah, which is also why I would have liked to see some of those shorter passes, the intermediary, Chris Olave getting involved there. We saw Juwan Johnson get targeted a little bit more in this one, and he was actually 5 of 5. Every single ball thrown his way, he caught 31 yards, long for 11. A couple of those were from Jay Kaner late. But then we saw Foster Moreau. He got involved. He was 2 for 2 for a touchdown as well. Those guys, I mean, they're big bodies. They can hold their own.
And look, part of the game plan, I know the mention was that the tight ends would have to give you a little bit more, especially with no Taysom Hill.
Right.
And specifically mentioned was Holker, who I thought might have an opportunity to get some targets, but he didn't. But I thought the tight ends would be of a little bit more use. So it's one of those things where Dennis Allen said essentially they just got beat every which way you can get beat. Play and coaching, and the execution just wasn't there. Now, can that be the pass rush? Yeah. Can that be a guy sped up because of the pass rush because he thinks it's going to get there? Yeah. Can that be Kansas City playing a little bit more aggressive underneath? Yeah. I mean, there can be a lot of factors, but some of those factors you should hopefully be able to sway in your favor, and the Saints weren't able to do it. And that was, I mean, like I said, you pulled it within 10-7, 16-13, but I didn't, maybe I'm wrong, I didn't get the feeling that the Saints had the ability to overtake it.
They didn't ever seem in control.
Yeah, I mean, Kansas City always felt like they were, even though you creep up on them, they felt like, okay, we see you, we got you. We're going to go down, and we're going to get something. It might not be a touchdown, but we'll get a field goal, make you have to get a touchdown to take the lead, and we don't think you can get a touchdown to take a lead. That's why we're okay with a field goal. Mm-hmm. And so, and they were proven right in this one.
You mentioned earlier how the defense had a tough game. They weren't as dominant as they had been in the past, too. However, after that opening touchdown by the Chiefs, they did really lock things down. They forced a 3-and-out, and then 3 straight red zone stops, 4 field goals. But to your point, Kansas City was still able to get down the field, and they were doing it every which way. Mahomes was running all over the place. Travis Kelce was taking the snap. He was throwing the ball. People were stepping up. Juju Smith-Schuster, obviously he had a huge reception in the second half, but you kind of felt like regardless of what the Saints were being able to do defensively in the red zone, eventually, Kansas City was going to be able to break through, and they did in the end.
Yeah, the accumulation of body shots gets to you, even in the NFL. Saints defense was on the field for 80 plays. 80. That is a lifetime of being on the field. 80 plays and 40 minutes of a 60-minute game is a lifetime. You can't get off the field on third down because, Kansas City, I want to say they converted 43%, and I can't remember the exact number, but like 43% of the third downs. And then to me, the epitome or the thing that really stood out to me, I can't even think of the right word. You get them 2nd and 34.
Right, yeah.
2nd and 34.
Alontae Taylor makes a huge play.
Yeah, he makes a huge play, and then they pick up holding penalty. So you get them 2nd and 34, and I'm thinking, mentally, and I'm sure on the sideline they got to be thinking, okay, we're going to get, we're going to force a point here. We're going to get off the field. and then they get like a 13-yard reception, and then they get a 20-yard hook and ladder, and then they get a 2-yard run on 4th and 1, and it's like, my goodness, they didn't even need a penalty to convert a 2nd and 34. And so then you start really getting concerned, because it's like, I don't know how many more favorable positions you can ask for, but as a defense, 2nd and 34, you got to get off the field.
Yeah.
You got to get off the field. And you can't, hook and ladder, you got to get off the field. And I mean, to not get off the field in that situation, Kansas City was kind of in control. It was like, Kansas City can I don't want to say do whatever they want to do, but you mentioned, Travis Kelce got loose early. Juju Smith-Schuster catches a 50-yarder on a crossing route where he is butt naked open. I mean, he is so wide open. And it just felt like, Kansas City could dial up what was necessary to beat whatever the Saints were utilizing. And I mean, to hold a team to 2 for 7 in the red zone is hard.
Yeah.
That's hard. But they got in the red zone 7 times. 7 times in the red zone. Yeah, they kicked 4 field goals, but they got in the red zone 7 times. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot. I mean, that's hard to defend. That's hard to deal with when a team gets to the red zone. Because, I mean, you get to the red zone 7 times, they converted on 2 of them, but eventually they're going to get you at some point. If they get there that much, they're going to get you at some point. Well, the 2 they got were critical ones that they were able to get touchdowns off of. And so those touchdowns essentially turned out to be the difference in the game, obviously, but they got there 7 times. That means they were moving the ball a ton between the 20s. And there were opportunities to get off the field or force a longer field goal attempt, which Kansas City missed one of them.
Right.
But they weren't able to do that. Harrison Butker kicks 4 chippies, and he misses the 51-yarder. And, again, this defense, you ask a lot of this defense. Now, this defense asks for that responsibility.
They like being aggressive.
They say we're that unit.
Yeah.
We're that dude. That's what they say. Well, 3 games consecutively, unfortunately, they have not been that dude. Now, granted, they hold Philly pretty good, but they give up the 2 explosive plays. You hold Atlanta pretty well, but you give up the game-winning field goal.
Yeah.
You hold Kansas City pretty well, but they get to the red zone 7 times. So you got to be that dude when it counts. You can't be that dude, when you're smacking Carolina around. You got to be that dude when it really, really counts. And I'll refer to what Alvin Kamara said, that, NFL games aren't the, 40-10 games. NFL games are the grit and grind 24-21 games. Those are the games you got to be able to win. And those are the ones that the Saints have to figure out how. Now, they weren't in a 24-21 game last night, but they got to figure out how to get in those games and how to win those games, because they were in those kind of games against Philly and Atlanta. Last night, they just played overall, they just played a better team. They played a better team. The 2-time defending Super Bowl champs on the road at their place on the Monday night, they played a better team.
Yeah, DA opened his press conference last night saying we got outplayed and outcoached. So it was a combination, and we know that Coach Reed over there is one of the best as well.
Hall of Fame.
So it's tough all around when the offense didn't deliver what they needed to do, and then you have the defense on the field for a lot of time. Eventually, they're going to wear down. You said, something about they needed to do what they needed to do in whatever moment. Well, they did in the red zone, but you're wasting so much time and you're giving them opportunities when you're allowing these chunk plays. And DA mentioned, the tackling that wasn't there, some of the mistakes that they don't usually have. They played a lot of zone in this game, which is different. The Saints usually play man. Do you think that they did that because they were trying to counteract what everybody had been saying about how aggressive they'd been and how they're getting burned?
It could be. I mean, but, and they might have seen on film that teams that play zone against Kansas City have fared better. Now, you got to handle your responsibilities when you do it. You can't have Travis Kelce running wide open across the middle, or Juju Smith-Schuster running wide open across the middle. You got to be able to do that. And if you're going to play that defense, you got to be able to stop the run, which they did not do effectively in this game.
Yeah.
So, and the gist of the NFL is if a team can run on you, they can do everything. If you can't stop the run, then everything in the playbook is available to that offense because you're on your heels because you can't stop the run. Mm-hmm. And the Saints didn't stop the run either last night. So, not playing some zone might help out your corners a little bit, in terms of being, not being in man-to-man, and maybe, you might not pick up penalties as easily, but you still got to be able to execute it if that's the defense you're going to run. And you got to be able to execute it to the point of when they're driving 70 yards or so, it can't be 5 plays. It's got to be 9, 10, 11. You got to make them work the hard way to force them to have to be clean, because the more plays they are out there, the more likely they are to do something to sabotage themselves.
139 yards on the ground is what the Chiefs were able to achieve last night. Kareem Hunt, speaking to the tackles, he forced 7 missed tackles last night and gained 64 yards after contact. You have to get these guys down initially because, again, you don't want to continue to give them extra first downs, extra yardage, and more opportunities to get into the red zone or to score. You look at this in its totality, and there's a couple things that stand out. You had the interception by Colin Saunders, which was so fun, such a great moment, but it just doesn't feel, it kind of gets overshadowed because of the loss.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to celebrate anything in a loss. Chase Young got his first full sack as a Saint. Bink got his first career interception as an NFL player. But it's hard to celebrate anything when you don't win the game, and when you feel, to a degree, defensively you were somewhat pushed around. Mm-hmm. So you don't get to flex in a loss. It just you can flex, but you look silly. I mean, nothing tastes as sweet when you don't win the game. So, Bink, I mean, he gets his pick. He returns it 37 yards. He's rumbling down the field. I mean, he
hit 15.8 miles per hour.
Yeah. And I mean, he said when I saw that 101 in front of me, like 101 yards, he was like, I got tired. So I can understand that. But I mean, for him to, because the agility and the dexterity to be able to kind of get that pick with one hand, big dude to pick it out with one hand, and then the wherewithal,
the balance to recover and run,
and to have the sense to cover up the ball, because at 325 pounds, you're going to be caught. So Bink's like, somebody's going to catch me. Let me protect this ball. And he had the ball in his locker after the game, matter of fact. But he's like, let me protect this ball. Let me not get this stripped. So, I mean,
he broke some tackles, too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, fantastic play, but it just gets lost in the watch, because then it's like, okay, hey, man, you got your first career interception. You returned it great, but you guys lost the game.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it doesn't even matter because you don't win the game.
I know. That it's hard because you want to celebrate those moments. And then even for quarterback Derek Carr, he hit some milestones, went over 215 passing touchdowns, and he became the 25th player in NFL history to reach 4,000 passing yards. Only 25 people have done that ever in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, look, Derek Carr, and I know we were talking about how he was harassed last night, but he made some fantastic throws. The touchdown to Rashid Shaheed was a fantastic throw.
Yep.
The touchdown to Foster Moreau was a spectacularly designed play that they basically scripted him open, and Carr has to make the throw. But I mean, it was what you draw up and what you're looking for. You can go back to last season, even though he was banged up. I specifically remember a late throw at Carolina that he makes to Chris Olave, where Olave makes a one-handed catch. He made some late throws to Rashid Shaheed last year. I mean, he has that ability to put the ball where it needs to be. You just got to see it consistently, and I say you got to see it consistently. He was 18 to 28 last night. That's not horrific.
No.
That's pretty good. That's about 67% or so. So it's just, you want to see more production in terms of the yards and the touchdowns, but again, you're slogging through and you're playing. I got to continue to refer to Kansas City and give them some credit, because that's a good team. That's a good team. but you want to see more production against the Atlantas of the world and of the Phillies. And I understand all these guys are grown men in the NFL.
Yeah.
And it's hard to move the ball on all of them. But you got to get that production in those kinds of games, because when you're playing the champs on the road, it's going to be a lot more difficult.
Well, it was difficult last night, and now you go into a shorter week against a division opponent. You have the Bucks coming into town. The Bucks coming off of an overtime loss to Atlanta on Thursday. They fall to second in the division now. It's going to be a battle on Sunday. And we don't know the status of quarterback Derek Carr. Carr comes out of the game before the second to last offensive possession. He said that it was something that he tweaked in the throw. And it was, again, another throw that he tried to launch. They said it's his left side. Oblique was what the injury report was last night. He is getting an MRI. There will probably be an update later this afternoon, tomorrow. But all that being said, we've seen Carr play through a lot last season.
Derek Carr is not coming off the field. I mean, unless it's, on a stretcher or something, Derek Carr is going to play. We saw him last year where he had the sprained AC joint, which by all rights and measures should have kept him out of the game.
Sure.
He played the next game, the sprained AC joint, not in his non-throwing shoulder, in his throwing shoulder. He played the next game. Then we saw him in Minnesota get concussed and a shoulder injury. Same game, probably same play. And Derek Carr probably, and I think the AC joint week, he didn't work in practice. The concussion and shoulder injury week, he didn't work in practice. On Sunday, Derek Carr was on the field.
Yeah.
He's one of those guys who, when he says, I want to be out there for my guys, believe him. He does everything possible to be out there for his guys. So this is, until he's not out there, I'm going to look at him like I look at Demario Davis, and I'll call Demario the Wolverine because nothing seems to put him down. The hamstring kept him out of the previous game, but he played in this one, so he only missed one game. Derek Carr is the new Wolverine because he doesn't miss games because of injuries. He missed some games with the Raiders because he got benched at the end of his career there.
Well, he broke his leg early in his career there.
The dude just doesn't sit, and so I expect him to play on Sunday, and I expect it to be a tough game because. Now, you got two things working. Derek Carr, trying to bounce back from an injury, and you got the depleted offensive line. You hopefully can patch some of that together. I don't know when Cesar Ruiz is going to be back because it looks like it's pretty serious. Obviously, he's missed a few games, but you factor in that Tampa has to have, I guess, some emotional. I don't want to say baggage, but I mean their emotions have to be torn somewhat. They had to evacuate, and they're in New Orleans already because they had to evacuate because of the hurricane. And you get, sometimes you can get teams away and they'll band together, but sometimes, when you're concerned about things back home, then it's tough to get your concentration together. Now the Saints were able to kind of do it. They were able to do it when they, evacuated for Hurricane Ida. We went to Fort Worth. Then played the season opener in Jacksonville, Saints beat the brakes off Green Bay down there. And so, it can be done, but I'm sure Tampa is, a little bit just unfamiliar with your surroundings. They come in here and they play a game, but they come in on Saturday, they leave on Sunday. Now you're here the entire week, and, I don't know if your sleep patterns are affected or if your meal patterns are affected. And, athletes are superstitious types. And getting them out of their environments can unsettle some guys. So, you don't wish ill on the Florida population, obviously, because those folks need help and they need it right now. And Godspeed, you don't want them to be pummeled by another hurricane. Now, the flip side is you do want Tampa Bay to be distracted, the players. You don't want them in top shape because if you're the Saints, and you want this win. You got to get off this 3-game schneid, and so you'll take it how you can get it because wins in the NFL are hard to come by.
We definitely have a lot that we could refer to in this matchup against the Bucks as far as what we can expect coming up in this one Sunday. But we always talk about the rivalry between wide receiver Mike Evans and cornerback Marshawn Lattimore, and Lattimore just hasn't really had that game in a little bit. He's been dealing with injuries. Does he come out and just turn it on another level Sunday.
Of course. Because, I mean, they're going to target Mike Evans because Mike Evans is their guy. And Marshawn's going to be covering Mike Evans, and Marshawn and Mike Evans probably can't stand each other's guts. They can say whatever they want to say. But the two suspensions that I know of that Mike Evans has had in the NFL, and Mike Evans has been like a man of the year for Tampa Bay. Mike Evans, twice in his career, has cheap shot Marshawn Lattimore from behind. And those two drew fines and suspensions. So those two dudes do not like one another on any level. I'd love to see them like at a charity event to see if they even spoke to one another. Because
I would say no.
I can't believe they would. And Marshawn, and here's the reason why Marshawn hadn't shined a little. Atlanta didn't throw at him. They're not going because
everyone's picking on Paulson Adebo right now.
For better or worse, teams are going after Paulson Adebo. They feel like they can get something there, and they're not testing Marshawn Lattimore. Well, Tampa Bay ain't going to do that. Tampa Bay's got Mike Evans, and Mike Evans is a guy who I think just recently went over like 10,000 receiving yards, and Mike Evans is 100 touchdowns or close to. Mike Evans is the guy they're gonna get Mike Evans the ball or try to. And that's going to be Marshawn's responsibility. And Marshawn has always risen to the occasion when Mike Evans has been standing across from him. So I'm looking forward to that one because it brings out the best in Marshawn the way Julio Jones used to bring out the best in him. He likes that level of competition. There are games where Marshawn's concentration level will dip. This ain't one of them because he does not like that dude. That dude does not like him. And when they see each other, there's going to be some talking and there's going to be some extra physicality. And somebody's probably going to pick up a penalty. I hope it's not Marshawn, but somebody's probably going to pick up a penalty.
Yeah, we don't need any more penalties because we've had enough that have hurt us this season already. This one is going to be interesting. You saw in the Thursday night game, Kirk Cousins just lit up this Tampa Bay defense. Over 500 yards is insane. So what do the Saints need to do? And we'll go ahead and assume that Carr is available. What do the Saints need to do to bounce back and take advantage of things Sunday?
They got to cut it loose. But again, it depends. Now, Kirk Cousins' offensive line, even though they had a couple of guys missing because they had some guys in, but they were able to get their feet wet against the Saints before they played Tampa. And the Saints weren't able to get Kirk Cousins on the ground nearly as much as they would have liked to. So that offensive line held up pretty well. Well, the Saints are going to have to do the same thing. Because if they want Derek Carr to, even if it's not for 500 yards, if they want Derek Carr to throw for, a good, healthy 250 or 300, the guy's got to be standing up. And you understand that Vita Vea is on the other side, lining up at defensive tackle, and Vita Vea has been eating interior offensive lines for the entirety of his NFL career. So he's going to be a load to handle. He's tough to deal with, and the Saints know this. You can't run up the middle against the dude. He's a pass rusher too, even though he looks like he shouldn't be a pass rusher. He's a big, big dude, but he's a force to be reckoned with. So if you're the Saints, you see something there, but I mean, because anybody, you look at that Atlanta film and you got to be saying, you know what? Okay, we got something here. We can get these guys, but you got to be able to keep the quarterback standing to be able to do it.
Yeah, I mean, and the Bucs still put up 30 points themselves. Baker Mayfield is doing extremely well this year, 11 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions, so he's also been very efficient, not going to give you a lot of opportunities to capitalize on mistakes, which is going to be even more important for the Saints to be locked in and execute, be there on the initial tackle, put more pressure up front on Baker, and hopefully get to him and get him
mobile.
rattled.
He's a lot more. He might be a lot more mobile than people give him credit for. He moves around.
He's definitely not afraid to.
Yeah, he's not afraid to. He'll scramble instead of scrambling. Instead of scrambling around looking to throw, he will literally scramble and pick up 8, 12, 15 yards on you. So you got to be aware of that when you're dealing with him. And if from afar, not having to play against him, you admire because what he went through in Cleveland, whatever that was, is now you look and say, yeah, okay. It must have been Cleveland and not him. Because, I don't want to say he's resurrected his career, but he's shown to be a much better player than what was put on display in Cleveland. So it's like, this dude can actually play. So when you see him coming now, it's like, oh my gosh, he's got there's a lot of stuff to him. But I say that, and the Saints went down to Tampa last year and had their way with him and the Buccaneers when Tampa Bay was probably looking to win that game to kind of clean up in the division. And the Saints were like, no, it won't be against us today. So hopefully the Saints can pull back out some of that stuff here in the Superdome Sunday.
You mentioned the injuries and the offensive line needing to hold their own. Do we think that the Saints stick with how things were at the end of the game with Connor McGovern in as center and Lucas Patrick staying there as left guard?
I think so, because I think they left that. I think the Saints like the left side with Tali Fuaga and Lucas Patrick.
Yeah,
and having McGovern at center allows you to keep that intact. And last night on Monday Night Football, Lucas Patrick leaves the game with a collarbone issue, comes back in the game, but he doesn't go back in at center. He goes in at left guard, which tells me that the Saints weren't all that happy with how Nick Saldiveri was holding up. And if that's the case, then you just go back to what's familiar, because now you feel pretty good about how McGovern held up at center, and you feel better about Patrick being at left guard because you like that combination, that chemistry between he and Fuaga. And the right side, you leave it alone the way it's been the last couple of weeks with Landon Young and with Trevor Penning.
Yeah. I think that Connor McGovern did a good job. I mean, Carr said so in postgame that he has the experience, the communication was on point, and he liked his snaps, which is huge.
And look, I don't care how long you've been playing in the NFL. When you go into a game cold and they're telling you to snap it to the quarterback and then protect, that's hard.
Yeah.
You can practice all you want. You can't simulate that in practice. You can go out there and play crowd noise in practice and those kinds of things, but you're going half speed. You can't simulate Chris Jones in practice.
Yeah.
So when he went in the game and handled it pretty well, then it makes you think, okay. And then Lucas Patrick left the field, comes back out, and goes in at left guard instead of going back in at center.
Yeah.
That tells you that the Saints felt pretty good about the way things were going.
Yeah, pretty telling. Other injuries that we're watching, I think just linebacker Pete Werner, because he was out for this game. He suffered a hamstring injury in practice at the end of last week in the last practice. And man, with Will Harris going down at safety, we really need to get some guys back on the field down there.
You didn't have Pete Werner in the game. Then you also didn't have Willie Gay. And then Will Harris gets injured. And it's like, what else can happen to this team in terms of, the soft tissue injuries are obviously concerning because they're stacking up. And then you got guys who are frontline guys who keep dropping. And it's like, how much more depth do you have? Because you're going out there with Anthony Orji and DeMarco Jackson at linebacker next to Demario Davis, and you're accustomed to seeing Pete Werner, and now you're hoping to get accustomed to seeing Willie Gay, who's a Super Bowl champ. And no offense to DeMarco, no offense to Anthony, but they're not Pete Werner, and they're not Willie Gay. So you go out there with that, and it's like, how are you going to manage this, Saints? How are you going to be able to kind of finesse this through? And I'm sure a lot of the miscommunication underneath and those kinds of things happen when you've got guys who are young and aren't accustomed to playing.
Yeah.
They've been in the system for a year and a half, 2 years, but they haven't been in the system for 5-6 years like Demario Davis.
Yeah, or doing it and getting those game reps.
Yeah. So now, that's where you can have those hiccups that result in chunk plays. And so, you need Pete Werner back, and hopefully he's got some Wolverine in him, because hamstring injuries are funny, especially with guys who rely a lot on speed. They are funky. You hope to have him back. I'm not exactly sure when Willie Gay will be back, because he had hand surgery, obviously. And so getting him back on the field, he's got to get back to practice first. So I wouldn't anticipate having him on Sunday. But Pete Werner, you hope to get him back out there. And if you can't have him back out there, at least those other two guys have had some baptism. They've had some exposure. They've had a lot of snaps in that last game, because when you play 80 snaps on defense, you're going to get some of them. So hopefully the trial by fire has helped them, mature a little bit more. Yeah.
We definitely have a busy week because it's Tuesday. It is a short week, which means they'll be back on the practice field Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. walk through Saturday, game on Sunday. Not a lot of time to take a break, to rest, recover. So, yeah, they're going to be getting after it pretty quick. JD, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to leave you with some words from defensive tackle Colin Saunders because I think he has a pretty good perspective on things. And I will talk to you all again on Wednesday.
I think that we learned a lot about our team, and obviously the score won't reflect it, but I think we got a lot of things a lot of positives that we can build off of, and things that we got to continue going forward. Like I said after the game, this doesn't do anything but guarantee that we won't be any better than 14-3, and I believe that. I've been on teams that had lost in week 10 and didn't lose no more. So stuff like that is always encouraging, and I just try and preach that to the guys.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Saints podcast. Join us 3 times per week on NewOrleansSaints.com, the Saints mobile app, or you can download the podcast on iTunes. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Saints podcast.